For those I didn't meet yesterday, I work at BBC Worldwide, so I have the pleasure of working with some of the biggest TV properties in the world. But before that, I worked in music and in dance music. I had the pleasure of working with the likes of David Guetta and Swedish House Mafia. And I do two things, I guess. One is to think about audiences and help us to understand audiences. So that was yesterday. And in particular, it was about going beyond the core EDM consumer that we know and love and helping us to think about those secondary consumers, like the fashion segments in Japan. And also yesterday, it was about thinking about trends for genres, like how fast dance music's growing in each country. I was really pleased to see that play into some of the debates later in the day, so you could take that knowledge and say, okay, so what? Like, how do we build on this, or how do we keep this going? And today, my job is to talk about technology. So technology is changing everything about our world, but I've pulled out three main areas where I think technology is impacting us, where there's some facts that we need on the table, and there's some clear actions that we can do to better use this technology to find audiences and to better engage audiences. We're going to start with streaming. Lots of debates on this topic. Hopefully we'll put some facts on the table and clear up some of what's going on and give you some really clear lessons. Next, what's beyond audio? We're in a world of video now. What does that mean for us? How do we capitalize on that? And then third, messaging apps. Clearly the future. I could tell that by all of you on messaging apps all the time during the gigs last night. Put your hand up if you were at a gig and you used a messaging app to communicate with your friends. Okay. Those who didn't put your hand up are not telling the truth. It was everybody. I'll talk about that and what that means as well. So let's start with streaming. Last time I was at IMS is a nice benchmark. It was a few years ago, 2012. The work on the impact of streaming was really clear at the time. I've been involved in 3 different really nice pieces of analytical work, and they all drew the similar or same conclusion, which is that streaming music services grow people's engagement and their spend with music. They're great for the music industry. That was definitely the conclusion in 2012. Who thinks that's changed today? Well, it has. It's changed radically. The answer now is that streaming services, for sure, cannibalize people's spend on music. The more you use music streaming services, so the less you spend on music. The world has changed, behavior has shifted, and they mean something different in the world today. The best gold standard scientific work, tried and tested in a court of law, shows this to be the case. So how we think about streaming services is really different in just 4 years. 27% of people say that they have stopped or reduced buying music downloads as a result. Discovery is how we used to think of streaming services. Okay, they discover on Spotify, then they go buy. No, discovery is consumption these days. And then we're in this period of rapid change still. In just 4 years, the world has shifted, our conclusions have shifted. It's going to shift again in the next year, in the next couple of years. But for now, I think the best way to think about streaming services is that they're more like radio than they are purchasing. It's not how we thought of them just 4 years ago. Having said that, purchasing is far from dead. We've heard the talk about this in the last day and the last IMS as well. But music sales are far from dead. Sales did fall by 8%, and they are falling rapidly, but they're still 71% of all revenue, downloads and physical combined. They're still really important, so not dead, dying maybe, or eroding quickly, but not dead. And let's take a quick look at the streaming landscape. It's incredibly confusing and complicated, and of course it varies by country. So here's a snapshot of the global streaming landscape. You can think of them as, on the left-hand side, very programmed services, so more like radio. On the right-hand side, on-demand services. There's a nice spectrum. And up and down, you can think of it as premium, like it costs money and real money to use, versus free at the bottom. And there's tons of different services in each section. But the problem is they're not evenly distributed, and users aren't evenly distributed across this spectrum. So there's a great range of offers, but consumption is really different. In particular, paid streaming remains niche. Yeah, we can use that word. It's niche. So while 52% of consumers, not that many, 52% of consumers globally stream, just 13% pay. And though 15 million of those payers are what we call zombies, they're like on trials they haven't kind of opted out of yet. They haven't turned their credit card off, but they want to. They're not real payers. So there's some looseness in that paid number as well. And finally, free is 31% of revenue, but it's 90% of users. So there's a really big bias here. Let's take a look at the numbers, though. So there are 10 million people in this top left, this kind of premium program segment. That's great. They're paying real money. There's something like 57 million people around the world in this top right quadrant, so premium on demand. It's getting bigger. There's 310 million, though, big numbers in the free program section. But the really big numbers here, of course, particularly thanks to YouTube. So the on-demand but free, over 1 billion people in that section. So streaming has a really wide variety of options. And yes, a lot of people are doing paid premium services. But programmed and free are by far the biggest areas. It's very unevenly distributed. And so what? What do we do about this? Well, talking about streaming being more like radio and playlists being the reason for that. So I read this just a couple of weeks ago. Streaming playlists appear to have overtaken albums for listening time in the US for the first time. Playlists are the new way people consume. The poor old album, if you look at free streamers versus paid streamers, not only do free streamers, the bulk of people, not only are they way less likely to say that they listen to albums than paid streamers, but also both groups, to a really high extent, say that they listen to albums and tracks less because they're discovering more music on these streaming services. It's driving people away from the album, which I think is a tragedy. So we're in this world of playlists. That's what people are using these services for. What does that mean for us? Well, it means it's an immense opportunity to get your music out there and to reach audiences if you can get on these playlists. Here's a case study that Spotify shared of a French artist, Feder, and you can see what happens to them when they get added to different playlists. So we start off, and this is in the Netherlands. They get added to a Netherlands playlist, and look at the bump in plays they get. It eventually goes back down again, but they get this really nice bump in plays after they get added to the playlist. Next, they get picked up on a German list. Look at the lift they get, up and up and up. They build popularity way after they're on the playlist. Sustained impact from that play. And look at the place it ends. It ends higher than it started. So they're building an audience thanks to playlist exposure. Next comes the US. Added to the playlist, much shorter bump, but a very meaningful bump in US terms. So getting added to playlists is the way that your music gets out there. It's the way that it reaches new people, and it's the way that you build an audience these days. So that, for me, is the first clear conclusion here, is playlists are immensely serious opportunities, and you should do everything you can to be a part of that. France afterwards, which I don't think the song was added to any playlists, gets a nice sustained bump in plays just thanks to all the global and international exposure. So a really nice story for this band, and something that we should all aim to replicate. So streaming, more like radio, think about playlists. Next, what happens beyond audio, beyond music itself? Because that's the world that we live in. And the reality is there are a ton of new talent these days across every single genre who are building their careers direct to consumer through video, through very kind of intimate, personal, very honest, very authentic video experiences with their audiences. And there are people reaching massive audiences this way. So what we're competing with in terms of engaging particularly young people are not people who've got beautifully managed and programmed accounts on social media, not people who have an agency helping them to put content out, but people who are building very, very authentic direct relationships. That's what young people want. Most of the celebrities on the top 10 celebrity lists for young people in the US are authentic, direct-to-consumer YouTube stars. It's not the programmed celebrities that we know and love. Real numbers. And it's not just on YouTube as well, these numbers. If you look at China, the Myope video clip capturing and sharing app, daily views surpassed 1.7 billion, up from just half a billion in late 2015. It's not that long ago. These things are growing amazingly quickly as well. And look at Weibo, 9.7 times year-on-year increase in video views. All around the world, authentic, direct-to-consumer relationships being built. And that's the challenge that we have. How do we make time for that in our lives? How do our artists make time for that? How do we do it in an authentic way to genuinely compete with these talent that are building huge numbers by doing this in every genre? So that's going beyond audio, the importance of video to consumers these days, and the opportunity to connect authentically with our audiences. Finally then, messaging, and why messaging apps are the future. So thanks to Nielsen, we have a piece of research asking people in China, how do you hear about live events? And it's fascinating to look down the list. It is so different than the same graph I would have produced just 4 years ago when I was in the music industry. Let me highlight some of these for you. WeChat, number one, 52% of people. By far the biggest way people discover live events. But also Weibo and others. Li TV is there, who we partnered with yesterday for the Skrillex live stream in China. So a radically different list than it would have been just a small number of years ago. Messaging apps are the way people discover music, and in particular live music. And they're big. We know they're big, but let's look at it. If you compare users for the big four social networks, which are almost ubiquitous in our lives, just look how fast messaging apps approached, and then overtook them. Messaging apps are now bigger than social media in active users. That is remarkable. And it wasn't the case just a very small amount of time ago. But we can't just think about messaging apps. Who spends time these days worrying about, thinking about building websites? Okay, we all should, because they're still incredibly important. Who spends time thinking about working on and optimizing presence on social media? Good, yeah, because you still have to. Messaging apps are bigger, but you still have to do social media as well. It's incredibly important. Who spends time these days thinking about apps, building apps, and putting apps out into the world? Yeah, you should, because they're still really important. And who spends lots of time these days thinking about putting content out there and engaging consumers on messaging apps? Yeah, okay, one person. I didn't put my hand up for that one. My God, how complicated is the world? We haven't really worked out websites yet. We're not really very good at it. They're too expensive, they're too time-consuming, and we're not really sure the impact they have. But at the same time, we've got to do this social network thing. I don't think I've quite worked that out yet from a corporate point of view. There's still a lot more to do. There's still a lot of discussions and debates. How do we get the right content at the right time? Apps, don't even go there. And messaging, I've not worked out yet. But you've got to work out all of these things if you want to engage consumers these days. You've got to. And if this scares you, well, I think it probably should. It definitely scares me. So we've got to be present in all these places to engage consumers. Luckily in music, on messaging apps, there is an answer. Actually, there are several answers, which is great. On the left-hand side, there's monthly active users for music messaging apps, which is, by the way, a thing I didn't really know much about until I prepared for this talk. 140 million monthly active users on these apps, though. It's amazing. And nearly 500 million cumulative downloads. And the biggest ones, to give you a head start of where to spend your time, biggest by far is Musical.ly, then Flipagram, Dubsmash, Thriller, and Music Messenger. In the TV world, where I spend most of my time, there isn't this opportunity. It's really hard to work out how to engage with messaging apps. I don't know how to do it. But you're lucky in music. There are some opportunities there. You should trust them. You should invest in them. You should spend time with them. You should try to make them work. Because some of them are going to be even bigger than this. And the pace of change is so fast and accelerating. If you take a look at how long it takes technology to reach, in this case, 100 million consumers in China, feature phones took 15 years to reach 100 million users. 15 years. If you go up to digital TV, 10 years. Brilliant. What a great acceleration of technology. Fast forward, smartphones, 3 years in China. Now the pace of change is really picking up. And by the time you get to these apps at the top, WeChat and the like, you're a year and a bit to reach 100 million users from nothing. It is remarkable how fast things are changing. And if you think that we understand this and that we can be comfortable with this, okay, a year, I can work that out. That's a decent pace. Things are going to get even quicker. Put your hand up if you use Pokemon Go. I do not believe you. The first app to reach 500 million users at such speed. In just 2 months, they reached 500 million users. And in just 2 months, they reached $500 million in revenue. An absolute record for an app. Faster than we've ever seen this kind of thing happen before. If anyone has any Pokemon catching tips around here, there's one that you can only get in Asia. I promised my kids I'm going to try and catch it. I need to know where it is. And if you think, yeah, that's fast enough, it's going to get even quicker. Take a look at mobile phone penetration around the world. We've got smartphones in grey, we've got regular mobile phones in orange, and we've got non-mobile people in grey. Immense opportunities going digital in our region. Look at China and India in particular, 350 million, 110 million, a vast number of people who are about to switch to a smartphone, who are about to suddenly enjoy day-to-day internet on their devices in their hand. Think about what that means for your music, for your videos, for your content, for your apps, for the websites, and for the social media that you're all working on. And then another 118, 140 million here who are not mobile yet, but will be soon. 1 billion people about to come online in this region and discover your content for the first time. If you think the pace of change was fast already, it's going to get so much faster. So, by way of summary, technology is eating everything. It is changing everything about our lives. And in particular, streaming, playlists, get on the playlist bandwagon. Do whatever you can to be a part of that and ride that wave, as we saw with the Feder example. Part 2, beyond the audio, your artists are competing with users who've built amazing audiences with authentic direct-to-consumer relationships. That's what you're competing with, and that is the challenge. How do you build an authentic stream of video and experiences for your fans? And finally, messaging is the future. Messaging apps are the new mall. It's the place people go to hang out. Be there, and in particular, watch out for the music messaging apps, and watch out for the next billion Asian consumers about to come online and discover your content. Thank you.